Hello! In this video I want to explain why Yugoslavia was a paradoxical state, or at least that is a thesis that uh, I originally read in a book by Dejan Jovic, but I kind of implicitly found that thesis present in many other books. And I also want to explain when I say Yugoslavia, I'm actually talking about both Yugoslavias, both the communist Yugoslavia and the monarchistic Yugoslavia. Both of them were paradoxical in their own way. And I also ultimately want to explain why Yugoslavia fell, why it broke up, although that's actually not a mystery. Okay, let's start at the beginning. In the First World War, this idea that even small nations, from Koreans to Koreans, by the way, lived under the Japanese occupation, from Koreans to Slovenians and Croatians, have a right of self-determination. Well, from the chaos of the First World War, this idea emerged. The idea that even small nations have a right to have their own state. And why was that the case? Well, because Lenin, as the leader of Soviet Russia, proclaimed it, and the United States, as the most powerful economy in the world, Woodrow Wilson, as the leader of that economy, proclaimed that the nations have a right of self-determination. Although Wilson later jokingly said that he would have never proclaimed that principle had he known about how complex Eastern Europe was, with all its crazy nationalities. But yeah, here we can see how Yugoslavia looked, the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, in the moment of its formation. And Jovic argues, like many other historians, that at the core of Yugoslavia there was a paradox. On the one hand, in the Yugoslav propaganda, in the propaganda of the Yugoslav king, that was previously a Serbian king, Yugoslavia is supposed to be an anti-imperialistic state, a state in which Southern Slavs now finally united, like the Italian states around Piedmont. Serbia was supposed to be the Balkan Piedmont. It was supposed to be a state in which Southern Slavs will finally be ruled by one of them. Although the problem was, I'm going to explain later, that it was a Serbian king, not a figure like Tito that transcended nationality. But yeah, it is supposed to be finally a smaller state in which Southern Slavs will feel like they are not ruled by an outside force. That was the official doctrine of the state. It is supposed to be a state that unifies all Southern Slavs, and Croatians, Serbs and Slovenians were allegedly just different tribes of the same Southern Slav nation. And there was a grain of truth in that ideology, although yeah, I say a grain for a reason, because that ideology was used to justify Serbian imperialism, or I should say the imperialism of the Serbian king. But it was true that for centuries great powers seeked to control the Balkan region, or to be more precise, the region of Yugoslavia, both the Russian Empire, the Ottomans with their bloody conquests, and the Habsburgs, finally. Although some people, some Southern Slavs, genuinely liked the Habsburg monarchy and saw even Franz Ferdinand as protector of the Slavs, but okay, nonetheless, many disagreed, and many realized that the identity of Croatians and Slovenians was to an extent lost in such a big state, and that Croatia and what is Croatia today and Slovenia was being economically exploited by the monarchy. But okay, there was one purely pragmatic reason why so many Croatians and Slovenians and Bosnian Muslims that even weren't a nation at the time, but why did they accept the Serbian king? And some even genuinely believed that they will have a better life in Yugoslavia than previously. And well, okay, let me state the obvious. There was the threat of a fascist Italy emerging. D'Annunzio occupied the city of Fiume or Rijeka immediately after the First World War, and later Mussolini repeated that. There was also a threat of Hungary occupying the region of Međimurje, but then Slavko Kvaternik, in the name of this new state, Yugoslavia, actually conquered Međimurje back from Hungary. But the irony is then later he became a Croatian fascist that actually proclaimed that Međimurje belongs. He gave Međimurje back to Hungary, but okay, that's one of those historical ironies, because he was the same guy that originally conquered it for Croatia and then unfortunately became a fascist later. But I digress. So yeah, the threat of these other countries also forced many Croatians to purely pragmatically accept this new state. But the problem with this new state was, as Dejan Jovic claims, that at the core of it was a paradox. And on the one hand, it was supposed to be a state that liberates Southern Slavs from oppression, and it was supposed to be a state in which a Southern Slavic king now finally rules over his people. But the problem was that Serbs had a privileged position, and they were still seen by the world and by the Serbian establishment as a nation that was the victorious nation that now had the right to rule over the nations that lost the war and had the right to be privileged in this new union. And the hatred that emerged between Croatians, Muslims and Serbs, and even the Serbs that fought for the monarchy, that lived among the Croatian people, like Serbs from Lika and Dalmatia, regions that were in the Habsburg monarchy, they were also treated as second-class citizens because they fought for the monarchy, and therefore they had higher taxation in the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. But this original hatred was formed in on the bloody battlefields of the First World War. And yes, the German military truly did commit horrible atrocities against the Serbs. No question about that. But the irony is that even many Serbs that served in the monarchy committed those crimes on the behalf of the Germans, the German generals, I should say Austro-Hungarian generals. And what's interesting about this is that that fact is actually a taboo in a Serbian historiography, and Croatian historiography is not that interested in it because it's essentially one group of Serbs killing another group of Serbs, and Croatians like to focus on people killing Croatian people. But okay, yes, on the bloody battlefield of World War I, this original hatred was formed. And yes, as I already said, back then, world was a jungle, and there were many predators that wanted to conquer Croatian territory, and therefore, to many it seemed that the best deal they have is to join this new union. The paradox of Yugoslavia, if you looked at the demography of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, which was roughly the same as this census, is that even the Serbs, as the most numerous nation, they were not all pro-monarchy. As already said, Serbs that served for the Austro-Hungarian emperor were discriminated just as the Croatians. And that was the main problem with the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, that it was a nation with the Serbian king in charge, and he treated some nations as nations that lost the war, and many simply wanted to have a republic like the Poles had or the Czechoslovaks. Many other Slavic nations got a republic, but Croatians, Slovenes, and Serbs, they still had a monarchy, and the king had the power to just prevent the parliament from assembling when he wanted to do it. And there was no free speech either. Stjepan Radic found himself in prison for on multiple occasions. He was a pro-democracy, pro-federalization Croatian leader in the parliament of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and then he ended up getting shot by a Serbian nationalist, Puniša Račić, because he was too popular. And fun fact, Puniša Račić was later killed by the Serbian communists, actually. Not many people know this. But yes, and the original kingdom was split into this bizarre set of regions called oblasti in order to kind of destroy local nationalisms of Croatians and Slovenians, and this is how it later looked. And yeah, that policy ultimately led to the Croatian fascists assassinating the Serbian king, who was trying to become an ally of France, but due to the economic compatibility with Germany, the kingdom actually exported 60% of its grain to Germany, which is why it couldn't even have a normal foreign policy. Even in its foreign policy, the kingdom was paradoxical. But what is an even bigger paradox is that smaller nationalisms were actually encouraged in the communist Yugoslavia as a tool against Croatian and Serbian nationalism, primarily Serbian nationalism, that was the most powerful because the Serbs were the most numerous people. And what also made this new communist Yugoslavia paradoxical? Well, the fact that it was the first anti-Stalinist communist state. It was de facto an ally of the United States, if you, at least economically an ally. If you look at all the money sent by the United States to save the Tito regime from Stalin's economic blockade. And Yugoslavia pursued a policy in the non-aligned movement. And on the one hand, Tito did truly believe in anti-imperialism, and he kind of continued this legacy of Yugoslavia being anti-imperialist. But on the other hand, Yugoslavia, if you look at the definition of the word empire, technically was an empire. It was a state in which one ruler, one non-democratic ruler, Tito, ruled over multiple nations. And what was also specific about Yugoslavia and kind of paradoxical, Tito started to claim that Soviet communism was actually just state capitalism, and therefore he did try to give more power to the workers by forming worker co-ops, and workers were actually, surprisingly, allowed to elect their own managers, but they still couldn't elect their own directors. Directors were still provided by the state. But at least in theory, Tito started to claim he actually was trying to abolish the state. And in the 1960s, Tito even proclaimed that regions within certain states, općine, as they were called, have a right to have their own foreign policy, which is bizarre and was just something that existed in theory. But yeah, what kind of is bizarre is that Yugoslavia, with its ideology of self-management, was the only communist state that kind of seriously considered this original Marxist theory about the state abolishing itself. And Yugoslavia, in a way, did abolish itself, but by strengthening local nationalisms and even autonomous republics such as Kosovo, that was given the right to have its own foreign policy actually by collaborating with Albania. And this is how Yugoslavia looked in the 1970s. And a famous British historian calls Tito the last Habsburg in Europe. And why is that? Well, not just because his cult of personality was based on the monarchistical cult of personality. The same can be said about Stalin, but because loyalty to this new Yugoslav regime was pretty much the same as Habsburg patriotism. In what sense? People were not Habsburg patriots because they believed that they believed in the concept of Habsburg nationality, or they didn't believe in Habsburg nationalism in the same way in which people that call themselves Yugoslav by nationality, they were doing it as a sign of their support for Tito, who, just like the Habsburg rulers, was a just emperor, a good emperor, an emperor that finally rules in the interest of the people, at least in theory. But many did perceive Tito to be this new good emperor that's finally helping the workers and giving smaller nations more rights, and even creating some republics like Slovenia, Macedonia. And Tito was very much afraid of a dictator like Slobodan Milosevic coming to power after his death and replacing him, which is why he kind of paradoxically strengthened local nationalisms and gave more rights to the republic, and finally even put in the constitution that that the people of Yugoslavia have a right of self-determination. But the main problem with Yugoslavia was that the entire country was kind of predicated on having this one great ruler that was above loyalty to a particular republic, like Tito. And he did have a strong cult of personality because he was the one that won the Battle of Sutjeska and all the famous communist battles of World War II, and the entire system was predicated on having this, to quote Tyner, the famous British historian, to have this almost a Habsburg-like figure that was given the right to rule, this time not by God, but by the people, by winning battles for the people. And without such strong personality that had a cult status, I would argue that entire nation was kind of doomed to break apart and doomed to fail, because Tito was then replaced by a faceless bureaucracy and by just, yes, by a faceless, non-interesting collective bodies that were supposed to be objective. But very soon, with people like Milosevic coming to power, they ceased to be objective, and yeah, without such a strong personality that truly was not on the side of a particular republic, I would argue that the entire country was was doomed to fail, and that's how we got the bloodiest war after Second World War in Europe. But now recently that title belongs to the war in Ukraine. Okay, that's all for this video, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe if you liked this video.